So usually I'm quite reluctant to change up on my workflow, but based on this node tree, I think there's an improvement that you can benefit from. Hey guys, I'm Danny, your friendly neighborhood colorist, and in this video we are going to be looking at my latest PowerGrade, which is the Visionary PowerGrades template version 6. If you have been following my previous versions, there are a lot of similarities to them, but in version 6 the major changes are in how the nodes are consolidated together so that you get a faster workflow without having to think about it too much. So it's more organized because I find that a lot of you are quite confused on the workflow and sequence of which node to work with. Right now in my color page, I have a clip that was shot on my iPhone 15 in Apple Lock, and I'm going to skip over the installation process. I have the PowerGrades already installed in my gallery. I've created a new PowerGrade album and imported all 4 of the DRX files. If you're not sure how to do that, you can watch this installation guide, because in this video, I'm going to break down each and every node in the PowerGrade, but if you want to save your time and support the channel, you can purchase them as well. All the updates for the PowerGrades will be free. So in version 6, I color-coded each PowerGrade. As you can see, for commercial, it's black and white. Pro is red, advanced is green, and beginner is blue. Because before this, everything is black and white, so it's a little bit hard to identify which is which if the thumbnails are super small. So now you can very easily navigate to which one you want to use. And each PowerGrade is following a similar structure. If I go into my commercial, you will see that it's following the same structure as the Pro, the advanced, and also the beginner. To get a clearer picture of how it's structured, you can refer to the user manual if you downloaded the PowerGrades. And within this user manual, there is a structure of how the workflow should be and also how the nodes are positioned. So everything is color-coded, including the breakdown of what to adjust in each and every node. So let's have a look at the commercial PowerGrade breakdown. From here, we start with our noise reduction, going into color management, going from your camera color space into your working color space. And then we have a row of parallel nodes for correction, another set of parallel nodes for secondary corrections, and look, then back into color management, going from your working color space to your display color space. And we have looks for Rexel 9, and lastly, finishing effects. And this is the base structure of all of the other PowerGrades as well, just that for the beginner and the advanced, we are not using a working color space. Instead, we are just working in the camera lock color space. So if you want to be using a working color space such as DaVinci White Gamut, I would suggest you use the Pro or the commercial PowerGrades. Going back into the color page, right now, let's apply the commercial PowerGrade. And right away, you have a node tree so that you can start your work immediately. So the node tree starts with noise reduction, but you don't have to do the noise reduction process first. In case you have a very noisy clip, then only you can turn on or use noise reduction here. And to apply noise reduction, you can go down into your bottom left palette into the motion effects. And there's DaVinci's built-in noise reduction, which is temporal and spatial noise reduction. You can refer to this video if you're interested on why this node is placed here and how you can use noise reduction very efficiently. If you want to use a third-party plugin such as Neat Video, you can also use it here as well. Moving on to the IDT, which is our input device transform. In this node, there is a CST applied in the effects palette, which goes from our input color space of choice into a working color space such as DaVinci White Gamut. In this case, this was shot in Apple Lock, so for the input color space, I'm gonna go to Rec 2020 and input gamma Apple Lock, and immediately you will see that our clip is color managed. That's also because in my ODT, which is our output device transform, by default, it's already set to input DaVinci White Gamut into Rexel 9 Gamma 2.4. And if you have other preference for your output gamma such as Gamma 2.2, that's up to you to change if you want to. So as you can see, I'm using a node-based color management workflow. If you want to use a project level or timeline level color management, you can also use that as well. Just remove all the nodes behind here and in front of here. Moving on, we have our parallel nodes here, which are for correction. The first node is Luma. Luma stands for luminance, which is corrections to the exposure, the brightness, and the contrast. Before this, I used to label this as primaries because I use everything in the primaries palette to make my adjustments, including contrast, temperature, tint, lift, gamma gain, and everything, including color and luminance. But since then, I got introduced to this concept to separate out your luminance adjustments, such as your exposure and your contrast, and your chroma adjustments, such as your temperature and tint, or your offset color, anything you want to make in terms of the colors itself. And this way, it's easier for you to see the differences if you want to make a change, because you can turn the nodes on and off, such as if I raise my luminance in the Luma, I'm raising my gain, and dropping down my lift a little bit. And for my chroma, I'm gonna lift the temperature up just the slightest. If these two nodes are together, I can't individually view the temperature alone. I will have to view both of the adjustments together. So I feel that separating out luma and chroma definitely gives you a little bit of help in order to see the adjustments that you are making. And the fifth node we have here is the HSV set, which is quite familiar to most of you. This is a subtractive saturation. So what we are doing in this node is if I right click, go into color space, it's being set to HSV, which is hue, saturation, and value. So if I turn off the hue and value channels, which is channel 1 and 3, I'm only left with the saturation. So this whole node is controlling saturation only. And in order for us to control the saturation, we can use either our gain or our gamma. Moving on to our next node, which is the highlights preservation. Before this highlights preservation was in its own category, but clumping it together with the corrections is probably a good idea. So this adjustment is using the qualifier, only using the luminous channel, and only qualifying the higher tonal range. And in my primaries, I'm using the highlight slider to drop it down by 50. So if I turn on my highlight mode, which is Shift H, you will see the areas that it's affecting, which is the brightest area in the frame. If I turn this node on and off, and look at the waveform, there is a slight drop in the higher tonal range so that I don't give this very digital high dynamic range look. It gives a very smooth roll off from the highlights. So you can either add more compression to the highlight slider here or reduce it if you want to. Moving on to our nodes in the secondaries category. The first node we have is a vignette, and this vignette is using a power window, a circular power window, going around the frame and giving a very soft vignette from the outside. By default, there's already an adjustment in the gamma by lowering it down to negative 0.04 so that it gives you a very soft vignette. If you want to increase it further, you can drop it down even more. And the next node that we have is a left window. So it's using a gradient power window and brightening up the left side of the frame. So if I turn this on, you see that it brightens up a little bit. And the next node is a right window, which is also using a gradient window and brightening up the right side. We also have a focus node which helps you to brighten up your subject if you turn it on. So you can place this focus window, which is a circular power window, onto your subject or anything that should be in focus in the frame. The adjustment that is being made is a slight lift in the gamma and also a slight lift in the gain. So this power window is also more or less in a face shape, so you can place it on top of your subject. And if you want to, you can go into the tracker window and track it for back and forth. For the next node is our skin tone. And in the skin tone node, if I turn this on and turn on my highlight mode with Shift H, it's using the qualifier to roughly qualify out the skin tone region. If I move to this frame, you can see that her skin tone is being selected very roughly. It's also selecting out the trees on the side here, but I'm not too worried about that because the adjustment that I'm making in this node is reducing the midtone detail. So if you don't know, the midtone detail is where the skin tone usually sits. So if you want to soften your skin, you can use this to make that adjustment. So if you were going to make further skin tone adjustments, not just to the details, to the softness, I would suggest that you make a cleaner qualification because this is just a very rough one and I'm not making any adjustments to the saturation or the hue of this node. And that's where this row of parallel nodes come in. So everything here is in parallel nodes, just that I split them into two rows. If you want to make any further adjustments, you can use these 5 nodes or you can even create more nodes below here in order to make those adjustments. Later on in the video, I'll show you a product shot which I had to make such adjustments. Before we move forward, I have to say that you don't have to use everything in the secondaries here. If you don't want to use a vignette, you can just turn it off because these nodes are here just in case you want to use it. You might not have to use the focus node in some shots, or you might not even have to brighten your left and right window. So use them very intentionally. Just because it's here doesn't mean that you have to use it. Alright, so going into our look nodes. First, starting with our creative LUT for DaVinci White Gamut, because remember, everything that we are working in the middle here is in our working color space, which is DaVinci White Gamut because we set it in our IDT already. So the LUT that you use here must be something that is meant for DaVinci White Gamut. And recently I just updated my Colorist Vault creative LUTs to include for DaVinci White Gamut as well in the Pro Pack. So there is a lot of different LUTs such as Autumn, Hollywood, Kodak, or Cine Green. I think emerald would be just nice. So emerald gives you a little bit of a green overcast. And if you think that this green is a little bit too heavy, you can go into the key output gain and reduce the opacity of the node. So let's go 0.5 or maybe 0.75. So 75%. And it will give you a creative look right off the bat. But if you don't have a LUT for DaVinci White Gamut, you can also create your own looks by grading it manually. Yeah, you can make any creative adjustment that you want in look 1. And look 2 is exactly the same, just that you get the option to audition different looks by turning them on and off. So the next note here is a split tone. And this is something that I did beforehand in DaVinci White Gamut to give you a better split tone result, where you can also turn it on and off. If you feel that it's too heavy, you can also use the key output gain 0.5 to give you a little bit of a split tone. Moving on to the spline curve node. This is something that I use in the custom curve using an editable spline. And this is a very nice roll off between the shadow to create a little bit of fading. So if I turn this on and off to create a little bit more of a cinematic contrast. So these are all options for you to craft out a look that you want. We also have the classic bleach bypass look to give you cleaner highlights, something of an added contrast as well. And you can also control this using the key output gain. Right now it's set to 20% in 0.2. If I go 100%, you get a very high contrast look. So I'm going to reduce it back down to 0.2. In this case, I actually feel that this is a nice addition in terms of the look. And our next node is the color slice density. So I'm using the color slice palette in only the density sliders. Before this, I included the saturation slider as well because it gives us subtractive saturation. But I feel that only controlling the density will give us more control, which is a darker tone to your colors. In this case, I think the bleach bypass is giving enough density to the clip already, so I don't have to use the color slice density. And next we have a halation node. So halation is placed here because I like how it reacts in DaVinci White Gamut instead of Rexel 9, which is downstream. It just rolls off a little bit nicer and a little bit more believable in a sense. So going out from our look nodes into our set of color management nodes, the first node that we have is a node for DaVinci White Gamut to Sony. So what it's doing here is in the effects palette, using a color space transform going from our working color space to Sony S-Stop 3. And some of you might find this very weird. Why are we doing this in this node? This is an intermediary node to solve a color compression issue for Sony footage when working in DaVinci White Gamut. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can watch this video. So we will only turn on this node when we are working with Sony footage. And I'll show this to you later on in our examples. So I'm gonna skip over this. And our ODT is as what we did in the beginning, going from DaVinci White Gamut into Rexel 9. So I'm gonna turn off this node first so that we have a proper color manage. And the last node here we have is a base LUT. So in case you don't have a proper ODT or CST for your camera color profile, you can use a LUT here to do your color management. For example, cameras such as the Osmo Pocket 3, which uses DJI D-Log M, there isn't really a correct input for D-Log-M. So you can instead use a LUT to do your color management. And after this node, you will see 3 nodes for looks for Rexel 9, starting with a creative LUT for Rexel 9, which I've also included in my Colorist Vault creative LUTs. But if you're not working with DaVinci White Gamut, such as in the beginner and the advanced PowerGrades, then you will have to use a Rexel 9 LUT. And below that, we have RE tones, which compresses your greens and also give you more pleasant blues. So this is something that I developed in the hue versus hue, hue versus set, and hue versus luminance to give you more pleasing colors, which are less digital. And the next node that we have is a Kodak 2383 film emulation. What it's doing in this node is add a slight blue in the shadows and warm highlights. So you can also use this using the key output gain and controlling the opacity of the colors that you want to come through. So I'm going to turn this off for now and moving on to our finishing effects. As for texture, you can either sharpen your image using the blur by reducing the radius. This will give you a more sharpened image. Or you can also soften your image using the midtone detail. So if I reduce it all the way, you see that it softens the image without blurring it. if we use the blur, it will actually blur the image. So it's a different type of setting. Let's say if you're doing something like this and you want a more Japanese vibe, you can reduce the midtone detail by -30 and it will just slightly soften everything for you. And the next node that we have is effects, which is any effects that you want to include, such as patch replacement, maybe lens reflection, things like that. You can use them in this node. And for the last and final node, we have our film grain. So the preset that I've made in this node is something that I prefer, which is 100% of the opacity and adjusted to my preference. So you can see that the grain is very nice. It's not too overpowering, just the right amount if you want a little bit of grain in your footage. But of course, if you want to customize it, you can do that in the effects palette as well. So those are all the nodes in my commercial PowerGrade. Now let me show you how I use them on a proper commercial that I did. So this is the finished grade using the commercial PowerGrade, and this is the result. I'm going to quickly run you through the whole process. Let's disable all the nodes, starting from the color management, going from our IDT. So this is going from Sony S-Log3 into DaVinci Wide Gamut. And since this clip was shot on a Sony camera, I have to turn on my intermediary node, going from DaVinci back to Sony. And for the ODT, going from Sony to Rexel 9 Gamma 2.4. So once I've done the color management, I'm going to start with the color correction. Starting with the Luma, what I'm doing here is using the gain and gamma to brighten up and using the lift to darken back down a little bit. And in my chroma, I adjust color only, which is using the gamma to push it a little bit towards the warm side. So the reason why I use gamma instead of offset or the sliders here is gamma actually reacts like linear gain in DaVinci Wide Gamut. It's a little bit of a tough topic to process, but hopefully I'll make a video on it. So if you don't want to use the gamma slider here, you can also use your temp and tint slider or the offset if you want to make any color adjustment. So once I got the white balance roughly there, I add a little bit of saturation using the HSV set and leaving the gain at 1.15, and of course turn on the highlight preservation, where you can see it sort of brings down the highlights a little bit. Moving on to the secondaries, the first note here is the vignette, and adding a vignette in this case helps us to focus in on the subject a little bit more. And skipping over the left window, right window, and focus, I don't need any of that. But I turn on the skin tone, so it roughly selects out her skin tones and helps me to soften it a little bit. And at this point, I feel that the vignette is actually a little bit too soft. So I use a harder vignetting using this isolate. So I've created a power window across the face, a very soft one in this case, and darken out the sides. And another small tweak that is bothering me a little bit is that this area here is a little bit too bright. So I use a power window, same thing, circle windows using this spot and darkening it. So if I select these three nodes and turn them on and off, you can see how much that we are shaping the light towards her face. Moving on, I'm not using any creative LUT here, but I'm doing my own manual look. So I'm adding a little bit of blue overcast and also pushing her skin tone back a bit, and that's being adjusted using the lift and the gain. And then I'm also using the spline curve to give us a more cinematic contrast and a little bit of bleach bypass as well to give us a darker look. As for the creative for Rexel 9, all I'm doing here is adding the codec 2383 film emulation to give us that very nice blue or teal rendering of the blues. And as for the rest of the finishing effects, I'm not doing anything, but of course you can use the film grain to add a little bit of spice to your grade. So this is something that I ended up with. Moving on to the next shot, which is this product phone shot. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to reset everything and starting over with the same process using the IDT to go from Sony to DaVinci Wide Gamut and using the DaVinci Wide Gamut back to Sony. And lastly, Sony to Rexel 9. And this is our color managed clip. So I'm going to show you how I usually work. Instead of going from a primaries to secondaries to look, I usually jump around whenever I want to, such as in this case, what needs to be fixed the most is of course the exposure or the luminance of it. So of course I'm going to use my luminance or the luma, adjust the gain, the gamma to go up, and moving into chroma to adjust for white balance. What I'm doing here is using the offset and moving it towards magenta. And for this clip, I didn't actually use the HSV saturation because I feel that the saturation itself in this clip is good enough. but I did use the highlights preservation a little bit. And at this stage, usually I would straight away jump into the look itself instead of doing the secondaries first. As for the looks in DaVinci White Gamut, of course, I'm going to use a spline curve to give us that cinematic contrast. I'm also going to use a bleach bypass just a little bit, I believe 0.1, and a little bit of color slice density as well. And to finish off the look for this clip, I used the Kodak 2383 at 0.25, which is 25%, because it gives a slight pop into the phone, which I kind of like. So once I'm done with the overall look in these notes, then only I jump back into the secondaries, starting with the vignette, of course, to give us more focus on the subject itself. And as for this focus note, I know that the focus of this frame is actually the phone, but I feel that her face is a little bit too dark. So that's why I placed this qualifier onto her face area. And then I'm just brightening up her face a little bit. As for the skin tones, of course, this is a commercial, so I'm going to slightly soften it. By default, there's a very nice qualification already done. At this point, I feel that the overall is more or less where I want it to be already, just that the phone itself is looking a little bit too green. So if I put my qualifier on the phone, you see that on the waveform, the green channel is pretty high. So I decided to go on a new node and label it as phone, go down into the windows using a custom curve and draw it around the phone. And of course, I can track for it as well using the tracker window, but the curve window that I drawn wasn't too clean, so I had to use a qualifier using only the luminous channel and selecting the high tonal range so that it only selects the whites. And once I got a clean qualification of the phone itself, then I can make the adjustments, which is going into my offset and going towards the magenta side. So I added a little bit more magenta so that the phone looks white. Besides that, I also go into the blur tab and sharpen the details in the phones a little bit as well. As for the next node, which is isolate, I feel that we can have a little bit more focus onto our subject. That's why I created a little bit of a custom curve window so that I can darken the outsides a little bit more. And this last node is using the chroma warp to reduce the blues that I find in the background, which is a little bit too saturated and a little bit too magenta. So I move it towards the teal side and reduce the saturation. And this is the final grade for this clip. So I hope you enjoy the process of me breaking down my latest node tree, and I've been using this day in day out on my commercial projects, and I feel that this is steady enough to release it to you guys already. So if you want to build it yourself, I've laid everything down for you, but if you want to purchase them, you can find the links down in the description below. And once again, any updates to the PowerGrades will be completely free, and during the month of July, I'm going to run an additional 20% off store-wide. So if you're thinking of getting any LUTs or PowerGrades from my store, now is the best time. Thank you for all the support you have given to me throughout the years. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.